My father and Masahide are cousins. My father turned 87 this year, but my grandfather was the third grandson, and Masa's father was the first son. Did you get that? Anyway, so we're relatives. But I want to talk to you about the power of and, which is today's forum is the power of and, right? I mean, Chulalongkorn University and Thammasat University. We have Thailand and Japan, and to give and so it's all about and. So let's get forward. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about origins. I don't know if you've been to Japan, but in Tokyo we have a place called Chulalongkorn, Kabutocho. This is where the Tokyo Stock Exchange is. If you walk about 100 steps from the Tokyo Stock Exchange, there's a building that kind of looks like this. It looks like any other building in Tokyo, but on the corner there's a plate there, and it says something like this, obviously in Japanese, but it says the bank's birthplace. At the same location about 140 years ago, this is the building that was there. This was the first national bank of Japan, which my great-grandfather, Shibusawa H, established back in 1873. Now, H had a problem because if you think about it, when you hear the word bank, whether it's in English or Japanese or Thai, in the present day, we all know what that is. But back in this era, if you say the word ginko in Japanese bank, nobody knew what it was because until then, bank didn't exist. So back in 1873, a bank was a venture business. It didn't exist before. So Shibusawa Eiichi wanted to sort of explain in society to the society what a bank was all about. And so he used this is the message he used for the first public offering memorandum, the first national bank in Japan. He said, a bank is like a mighty river. Money that does not gather there is merely a puddle of water or a dripping dewdrop. So even though it has the ability to bring wealth to the people of the nation, its effects are unrealized. So money is a valuable resource, but if it's spread around, it has little power by itself. But if it gathers at a bank and it starts to accumulate, and it starts to flow, then it gathers with other flow, and then eventually if it becomes a large river, then there's power behind it. And this is what happened in Japan during the industrialization of Japan, industry advancement in the Japanese economy. And so if you think about it, Patrick mentioned capitalism as sort of in the present language. It's kind of a dirty word because it produces inequality. But if you think about it, origins of capitalism, origins of a bank, there's nothing dirty with it. Basically what it is it gathers valuable resources that are spread around called money. It gathers them together and makes it flows again towards the future. So that's what it's all about. That's the role of capitalism and a role of a bank. Now Shibusawa is known to have started about 500 companies, private business companies, and about 600 nonprofit hospitals, universities, and other nonprofit activities. And so he's known as the father of Japanese capitalism. But interestingly enough, this is Shihonshugi, which is capitalism in Japanese. He really never used the word capitalism. Instead, he used a word called Gapponshugi. And this is the message that we want to deliver you today is about what is this Gappon? What is the difference between capitalism and Gapponshugi? This is my personal interpretation. I'm not an academic, but this is my interpretation. Capitalism, if you think about it, in English, capitalism, the root word comes from Latin, capita, which means it's the head. So for capitalism, there's a person called the head that's important in capitalism. Because the head is able to think, it can tell what is more advantageous, what is more profitable. It can compare it and make their judgment. So this is the power of or, I think. Gapponshugi talks about sort of oops, sorry, too fast. Talks about just like this one, tiny dewdrops getting together and forms a mighty river. in that concept, there's nothing really, a key word like advantageous or profitable doesn't ring a bell from this kind of picture. Instead, for me, what it does is it raises some key words like empowerment, common value. Empowerment of a tiny dewdrop getting together and forming a mighty river. Now that's empowerment. Why does a tiny dewdrop, why do we gather? You have to share some common value. Otherwise, scattered resources do not gather. And so I think there's another key word that is important called common value. And you think about it, in English, Gapponshugi is not a word that's used in Japan these days. But if I had to translate it into English, I would probably use the word corporatism. And the reason why I choose this word is because the root word for corporatism also comes from Latin, corpus, and it means the body. So let's say there's a big, large rock, and one person doesn't have the power to move one huge rock. But if several bodies get together, and if they share the common value of pushing it in the same direction, you can move the rock, right? So that's the message I think behind Gapponshugi kind of way of thinking. For capitalism, it's a huge rock. One person can't move it, but the capitalism is the head, so it's smart, right? It can think. It can use this long stick, use it as a lever, and move it with just one person. Very smart, right? It can be only one person. But if that rock stops, and if it starts to roll back towards you, then the lever kind of jumps up, and you might hurt yourself. Of course, in my industry, it's called financial leverage. And so within capitalism, there's this concept of leverage, whereas in Gapponshugi, it's not so much about leverage, but it's about sharing the common values and empowering the small bits of dewdrops in the society. So, you know what Longo is? Maybe it's the dialect of Confucius, and this basically represents virtue. And you might have also seen in Thailand, it's called the abacus, soroban in Japanese. This represents business. And so H. Shibusawa's one of his trademark was Longo and soroban. So what is this Longo and soroban in common day sort of language? The way I think about it, looking back on Shibusawa's sort of words that he left, he said something like this. He said, top management may become very wealthy individually, but if most of the society suffers in poverty, then its own happiness will not last. He also said something like this: if that wealth is not achieved through the proper way of doing things, then that wealth cannot last. That is why it is important for us today to make efforts to merge Longo and soroban, which appears to be so far apart. So basically he's saying that virtue and business, you need both. And so if you think about it, why do we need both? I think we need both for sustainability. So my message for Longo and soroban in common day language, sustainability. The reason why I think about this is Shibusawa started to say Longo and soroban not during the Meiji Restoration when the first national bank, Japan, was established. There's more towards the latter part, like in the 1910s, 1900s. That's when Japan was able to catch up with the West. But I think he had some questions whether that sort of catching up is sustainable or not. So talks about sustainability, and if you think about it in terms of sustainability, I think there are a couple of key words that I think we need to think about. And what is this word called empowerment? Yesterday in the workshop, I kind of suggested this word, and it raised some issues because the word empowerment means different things to different people, I found out. But for me, this empowerment is all about inclusion. Because if you think about it, tiny dewdrop has no power, but you bring it together and you empower it. So a voice that cannot be raised by one person, if you gather them together and if you form one voice, then it could have some impact. And so this is what I think is the message behind Longo and soroban. So this is the power of and, I think. I think the Dean mentioned SDGs earlier. I won't go into this detail because there's a lack of time. But if you think about it, in SDGs, there are 17 goals and 169 targets, which means there's so many targets and so many goals that a private business, whether it's a large corporation or a small corporation, can play some role. I mean, there's 17 of them, 169 targets. There's some role that I think even a small business can play in terms of trying to reach the sustainable development. Now, this was a evolution from the MDGs, right? MDGs was the Millennium Development Goals, which was established in 2000 when we came into the new millennium. That was all about, there was 8 goals then, and that was all about the advanced industrialized nations supporting the development of emerging economies. For SDGs, it's sort of the next level. It talks about sustainability. It's not just about the industrialized nations supporting the developed. It's about also the sustainability of the industrialized economies as well. So this is all about inclusion, right? So I think this is a very powerful message going forward for the next 15 years. Now, I want to show you this, slide. This is Japan's population back in 1930. This is around the time when my father was born. Japan was a very, very young economy back then. 1950, after World War II, Japan was still a very, very young economy. See? And there's the big population goals there is called the baby booms in Japan. This is the age when I was born. And in 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, 200, 350. This is what Japan looks like right now. And the interesting, or the sort of the aspect that we should look about this is that Japan, compared to other Asian economies, it's this bracket. This bracket is the most populous. It also has the wealth in Japan because they experienced the rapid economic development in Japan as adults. This next, in the 40s and under, this generation has never experienced the rapid economic expansion in Japan. They never know new growth. So basically, I mean, this segment is well off, but basically, compared to this generation, it lacks the money. It has no money. So it's okay for now, but looking for Japan towards the future, 2020, 2025, 2035. People that were 40s becomes obviously 30 years later, around 70. But if this population lacks the wealth, is the most populous, and it's in a democratic society, raises their voice, we're going to have some big social issues here back in Japan. So a very important message for Japan for sustainability is how to transfer the wealth from the older generation to the younger generation. This is a sustainable issue for Japan. And we know that Japan is an aging society. I found this chart. I thought this was very interesting. This is basically dependency ratio, which says children, population aged 0 to 14, and also the elderly, divided by the 15 to 64, which is the segment of the population that is very economically active. They're out in the workforce supporting the economy, right? So if you look at it, Japan, this was when Japan was young. And from 1970 to 1990, basically this is Japan's rapid growth period. Then from around 1990, it started to grow very, very rapidly towards the aging population. So this is Japan. But look at Thailand. Thailand is here. Actually, your society is getting old pretty quickly from around right now, actually, from around right now. So looking at Asia, Korea is right behind Japan, and actually, you guys in Thailand are very, very close, actually. We have some friends from Indonesia. Indonesia is this, and so you guys are still young. but obviously, this is a big social issue, sustainable issue, not just for Japan, but also for your country, Thailand. I found this chart as well. I thought it was interesting. This is your country, Thailand, 1970. It kind of looks like Japan back in the 1930s or 1950s, right? Then 15 years later, 1985, it starts to look like this. 2000 looks like this. Today, it kind of looks like this, which kind of looks very similar to Japan, except for that Japan has this bulk. You guys don't have that, right? Japan has this. Then going forward from 2030, 2045, kind of looks like this. And so I was thinking Southeast Asia, very, very young, viable economic growth society going forward. But if you think about it, Asia is getting aging pretty quickly, rapidly. And so if we think about sustainability for our future, meaning Japan and also Thailand, we need to think about this. I mean, how do you provide yourself for your future? And of course, in Japan we have a pension system. Sure, in Thailand you have as well. What my company is doing. Oh, this is. I'm sorry. This is. I forgot to mention this. This is the Global Pension Index, which ranks in terms of adequacy, sustainability, integrity. I couldn't find Thailand on this list, but if you look at it, Japan is there. Our friends from Indonesia is just right above us. And so I think Thailand is probably around this level, maybe perhaps lower. So looking forward, I noticed that in this room, it's mostly young people, right? And you're going to be around 30 years from now. And it's going to look like, that population. So what you need to think about is how do you prepare for yourself for your future going forward, for yourself and as well as for your family.